All right, so hi, buddy. How are you doing today? I hope you're fine. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking. All right, so before we really get into the big parts of macroeconomics about the graphs, the definitions, and all those things, I think it's really kind of important to kind of stop and understand a little bit about like where these ideas came from, because later when we're trying to do policies to try to solve some problems, we have certain expectations. Whenever you do something, this is going to happen, or you do this other thing, this is what we expect to happen. And so trying to really grasp why that happens and why we think that, I think it's really important to try to understand some of the thought that goes behind it and where these guys are coming from. So hopefully this won't take too long. I would like to start this whole thing by doing an overly simplified brief history of the economic thought of a bunch of notable dead white guys. Notable because, well, they're all dead and, well, they're all white. Or maybe a nicer way to put this would say, call them the worldly philosophers. Now, the reason I call them the worldly philosophers, it comes from a book I read a while back, and I think it's a good way to try to describe this. So before Adam Smith, before this age of economists as we live in now, there really weren't economists. Before that, people did philosophy. Of course, people always have tried to figure out what's the meaning of life. Why are we here? What's the purpose of things? Why are we doing the things we do? What's the best way to live your life? This is a lot of the questions philosophy is asking, right? But the process, the approach is really kind of looking at it from a heavenly perspective, maybe even involving gods. And you're trying to look above the world, look down on the world and try to understand, why is it this way? What can we do to make it better? What's the best way to do things? That's really the approach philosophy takes. But these economists, the difference is we start here at the bottom. And you say, okay, look, this is the world we got. This is how things are. Let's try to understand it down here and kind of come up from it. So we're not trying to tell people what to do or trying to say like, this is the best way to live your life. We're just saying, look, this is humans at the bottom. This is where it is, starting at this bottom ground. And then this is trying to understand the world. So again, these are old dead white guys trying to figure out the world and trying to figure out why things are the way they are. But instead of the heavenly approach that most philosophy is, it's starting from the bottom. Oh, pause. Hey, you didn't pause. Pause. What's wrong with you? Pause. How? All right, well, anyway. I need coffee before I get into all this philosophy junk. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to build a tree of economic thought going up from what it starts to where we are today. And again, I'm oversimplifying. I'm not doing all of it, just some big key ones going forward. So naturally, if you look way down in the corner, I'm going to start here in 1776, which is the year that America became a country, coincidentally, but it's also the year that Adam Smith wrote his great book, The Wealth of Nations. So Adam Smith, you definitely have to know Adam Smith by this point. Adam Smith is kind of where everything starts. That first book is the Bible. It's the main important book of economics, and everything kind of grows from that. Going forward, we have roughly 50, 60 years of people taking Adam Smith's ideas and building on top of them and building on top of them, adding more ideas and building on top of them. I don't really want to go through these guys, but there are a couple I want to point out real quick. It's not super important to know these guys' names right now, but they will come up later in the course as well. There's David Ricardo and there's Malthus. So we'll talk about David Ricardo with international trade and comparative advantage. That's kind of his famous idea. And then there's Malthus. Whew. Malthus will be a fun one. Malthus, well, depending on the way you look at it. Malthus is famous for calling economics the dismal science, the bad science, the horrible science, the scary science, the depressing science, kind of all those things put together. And he's not totally wrong. His big kind of contribution to economics was, economics, the conclusion of economics is we're all going to hell and we're going to live miserable lives. We're going to have overpopulation, destroy the planet. That was really his conclusion. Um, People were scared of it. People believed it. And then we kind of stopped believing it. And well, ideas are kind of still around in certain ways. So we'll definitely come back to him in other ways later. But anyway, moving forward. So going up to these guys, I want to stop roughly around 1860. Again, I'm oversimplifying, just general time period. This is one area where the economics really has a big branch that goes off in a different direction. So most people are taking Adam's ideas and they're kind of adding to them. They add more and kind of go off, and there's a lot of little branches along the way, but there's these big core branches, and then a big core one happens here around this time, mostly because of this guy, and that's Karl Marx. We know about Marx. You guys know about Marx. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about Marx. He is a big branch on this, and a lot of ideas come from him, but that's not really the focus we're going to. So, and a lot of Karl Marx leads in a completely different, crazy direction. But he has a big branch here to point out, really to point out because of the other side. Most of the thought in economics is really going this way. We have the Austrian school, utilitarian marginalists. You don't need to know these guys' names necessarily. It's not that important, but I do want to make this point here is you have Adam Smith. We're building on these ideas and building those ideas. And right around here, we kind of have this big break where Karl Marx, he looks at the world and he goes, you know what? The world is these cycles, and this is just another cycle. Let's go this way. But most of these other guys, they're looking at the world, these worldly philosophers, and they're going, here's some ideas, understanding. Let's add some more stuff to it. Let me add my interpretation. Let me add more data. Let me add more information. And they're trying to explain the world through the price mechanism. They're understanding this is a thing that humans do, and we can try to figure out what's the best way to live and what's the best way to do things. We can add more ideas to this and make economics more scientific and add more data to it. And we're really just building on top of Adam Smith's ideas, where Karl Marx kind of went in a very different direction. So that's kind of the thrust of most of the thought at this time. And that's why I'm going to make my tree branch here just slightly thicker to kind of make that point. I'm going to just kind of ignore Karl Marx because that goes the wrong way. But really these guys, again, you don't have to know these names in particular, but understand like they're all building on top of Adam Smith. Okay. Now, during this time, there's a lot going on in economics where we're really changing. We're adding in graphs. We're adding in supply and demand. We're talking about consumer surplus, producer surplus, and adding in these other ideas and really, marginal ideas and all those things. But what I really want to say is when the next big kind of main branch that happens, right around 1930s. Actually, this one's a pretty clear one. 1929, the great stock market crash in America, which led on to the Great Depression. It was around this time where economics massively changes. I gotta finish my dinner first. I made chicken. Very good. Okay, anyway. Now, what I want to say here, this is kind of a key thing, is when the stock market crash happens, it's terrible, right? It's 10 years of Great Depression. In the US, 1 out of every 4 people didn't have a job, 25% unemployment. I mean, just imagine 1 out of 4 people didn't have a job. I mean, right now we're all stuck at home. Everything's closed because of this virus. Imagine like this economy going on for 10 years. I've only been doing this for a week, and it feels like a month. I want to shoot myself already. This was totally unexplained. So these ideas that we're following up here from Adam Smith and going these ideas, they're mostly microeconomics. And it did a pretty good job of explaining the world to this point. It's mostly kind of things on a small scale. It's understanding supply and demand and equilibriums and all those. And the idea with that is yes, things go up, yes, things go down, but it all kind of balances itself out at the end. It all kind of works out. Not everybody's happy, but it tends to work out on its own. And that's the big lesson of economics is people figure things out. By the time this stock market crash happens in 1930s, these ideas are no longer working. The world had totally changed a lot in the last 150 years. We were no longer just poor farmers mostly. Now we had the Industrial Revolution. Things were drastically different. And the scale was much bigger. And we couldn't really explain why this was happening and why this Great Depression kept happening and kept going and kept going and kept going. So in 1936, this guy writes his famous book, John Maynard Keynes. Now, as much as you know Adam Smith, you also equally need to know Keynes. Keynes completely revolutionizes and changes economics forever. Basically, this guy invents macroeconomics. He basically invents a lot of the ideas that we have to talk about for this next semester. It really kind of starts with him. Now, he was already famous before this time. He really became famous after World War I because he predicted Hitler was going to happen because of the way things turned out. He became really famous in the 1920s, became rich on the stock market, lost all his money, then gained it all back. He was already kind of a big celebrity of his time. It's kind of crazy thinking economists are celebrities. But he basically looks at this and says, hey, these classical ideas, you guys now, you're all classical guys. You old dead white guys, your ideas aren't working anymore. They don't solve anything. We need new ideas to explain this new world. So he writes a book trying to do that. I push the pause button and pause. I want to pause because I want to drink more coffee. Pause. Come on, pause. I'm going to just, again, overly simplify it. But here's basically his ideas in a nutshell. So he's saying, look, you classical guys, you believe the price mechanism, you believe like things will work itself out. Yeah, there's a deep truth to that. It's not totally wrong. But you know what? People are sheep. We follow each other. We'll follow each other up. We'll follow each other down. And the problem is we don't always just go back to normal. We can get stuck. We can get stuck high. We can get stuck low. We can get stuck, and we get stuck there for a really, really long time. We need somebody or something to kickstart it, to start things up, to move things up again, or move things down again, whichever direction. We'll all follow each other. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but that's a basic idea. So prior to Keynes, there really was no government in the economy. There was the economy and then there was government. They were two kind of different things for the most part. In fact, at this time, there really was no the economy. People didn't talk like that. There wasn't this verb and this noun of saying, yeah, there's the economy. Today, we say the economy. There wasn't even a thing then. Keynes comes along and basically makes this a thing. He says, no, there's the micro, yeah, but there's now the macro, and there's this bigger scale of things, and we should look at things at this perspective. And when he does that, he comes to this conclusion of saying, us as sheep on this macro scale, we follow each other, we get stuck. We need something to get us out of it, and that something can be government. So one of his big ideas was like, we need to get the government more in the economy. We need the government to move things. The government can be the actor that gets things moving, and the rest of us can follow along with it. These are kind of revolutionary ideas at the time. Seems kind of obvious a little bit today, but not at the time. Not totally everybody was on board. We had these ideas going all the way back to Adam Smith, and he comes along and says, throw them all away. Not everybody was willing to do that. In fact, there's another guy that argued against Keynes here, a really important guy that I want to introduce here as well. This was Hayek. Now, John Maynard Keynes, he was a professor at the London School of Economics. He was also a bunch of other things. And the London School of Economics hired Hayek to fight against Keynes. Hayek was his complete opposite. He didn't believe any of these ideas. Hayek, if I was to summarize Hayek's ideas, Hayek was to say, well, that's preposterous. You don't know what you're talking about. How we don't know enough information to be able to solve these problems. Government, you're probably the reason why it happened in the first place. So Keynes and Hayek, I mean, they were friends, they were workers, they worked together, they were colleagues, but they also battled each other. They were these huge celebrities at their time, completely opposite, ideas of how things worked. No, Keynes was he was the Coke where Hayek was Pepsi. Keynes was Steve Jobs where Hayek was Bill Gates. Keynes was Brad Pitt where Hayek was Leonardo DiCaprio. Keynes was Chung Long, like Jackie Chan, where Hayek was Liu Lingjie, Jet Li. Keynes was Fan Bingbing. Hayek was taxes. Keynes is Jeff Bezos. Hayek's Ma, Jack Ma. Keynes is Little Hua. He's Andy Liu. The Hayek's the other guy's name, Danny something. What the heck is his name? Anyway, you get my point. So again, summarizing their ideas, they both understand the problem in the economy, and Keynes looks at it and says, we need something to fix it. That something can be government. Where Hayek's big idea was like, really? No. Like, yeah, there's a problem, but do you really know what's best? We don't have enough information to really know. In fact, government, you probably caused the problem in the first place. And the hubris to think that you can solve it. Hubris. That's one of my favorite English words. Go look it up. Actually, it's a Greek word. It's not an English word. Hubris. Hubris. It's fantastic. Anyway, great word. Anyway, Hayek was a champion of the price mechanism and trying to figure out problems by understanding that we don't have enough information. And in fact, you might actually be making things worse. Needless to say, something needed to be done. And most people ended up following Keynes. A little nod here, I do want to point out Karl Marx is still around. Many people in the world are following him. It wasn't the main thrust. And so, just kind of pointing out he's there, but that's not really where we're going with things. But really, it came down to World War II happens, and the government really gets in big in the economy, and the economy comes back better than ever, and it continues going on. So Keynes wins the day. Keynes is the champion, and that's kind of the branch that most economists start to follow. On my little tree here, I'm going to make the Keynes one just slightly bigger to represent that this is the area that most economists start following is Keynes. Keynes has the ideas. Keynes understands it. So what economists do is follow his ideas mostly. Hayek's always there in the corner. He's always there saying, you're not that smart, stop it. And he's always kind of there. And there's a deep truth to what he's saying. He's really channeling and talking about Adam Smith and a lot of these classical guys. That's definitely still happening. But Keynes he has the biggest voice. And again, Marx is kind of there, but not really. During this time period, economists, they're building on top and building on top and building on top of Keynes's ideas. And they're looking at how the government can solve problems. And we're doing this. And it's working for the most part. The economy is going well in most places, considering everything at this time. And economists are they're collecting more data, adding more ideas to it, putting more to it, and looking at how we can solve these problems. And it works for the most part. Until about the 1970s. Now, I want to make another break right here because here's another key point in all this, the 1970s. But the break, it's not really a break, but a big split that happens on the Hayek side of things. But it's Keynes that really is the problem. All right, I think this is where kids kind of start to fall asleep and start to hate this stuff. But here we go. So 1930s, the economy sucks. We can't explain why. Keynes invents macroeconomics and helps solve these problems. Great, it's working. The problem is by the time we get to the 1970s, we have another problem. We have really bad inflation. We have oil prices going up. This is big things, issues with OPEC. And Keynes's ideas no longer work the way they used to. So when you have a certain situation, many Keynes ideas come along and they can solve that problem. But it doesn't solve every single problem. And by the time we get to the 1970s, we have a different problem. And more government and more Keynes ideas actually make that problem worse. And so we start falling out of favor. And now people they look around and go, well, Marx, but Hayek here, these ideas over here, they still have some deep truth to them. And they've been working this whole time. Let's go back and revisit some of these. But it's these ideas, these classical guys, the Hayek channels and others. Again, there's lots of little branches happening at the same time, but I'm just kind of focusing on some of the big branches. And economists start looking over here, and people start looking at them and saying they have the answers in this situation. But again, we're building more and building more and building more. These ideas are based on these classical ideas that go all the way back to 1776, but it's 200 years later, and we have a lot more data and a lot more ways of understanding things. And even over here on this Hayek side, there's two kind of breaks that happen. They're not really a break, but two parallel strong branches that are happening at the same time. And I want to introduce one more guy here named Milton Friedman, who's personally one of my favorite economists, mostly because he was a really jerk about things. And he kind of represents both of these branches at the same time going together. But both these branches are really still on the same side. They're based on these classical ideas. Let's say, let's go back to the price mechanism. Let's go back to people themselves. Governments, actually, they're the problem today. And now let's go back to these other ideas to help solve things. And Milton Friedman is the guy that kind of champions these ideas. So he's kind of anti-Keynes in a lot of ways. So, we start with Adam Smith and we start solving problems. Karl Marx comes along and he looks at the problem in a very different way, and some people follow him. Other people continue along this path. 1930s, this big, terrible problem, and we start having divergence along there. 1970s, we have another major problem. And, we kind of go back in this other direction. So one thing I want to point out here is that when we go forward in this class and we talk about different policies and different ways of understanding things and different solutions, one solution doesn't solve everything. One solution has advantages. It also has disadvantages. And that's going to be true for all of them. So every time you get to a different situation, you have to pick the right solution. You can't always just pick one. And it's taken us understanding economics and building on these ideas and building on these ideas and learning from experience to try to figure out which ones are which. So during the 1970s, we kind of moved back away from Keynes and go back to the old ideas again, championed by Milton Friedman, but at the same time, not just old ideas, but advanced new ideas, new ideas that are connected to the old ideas, if that makes sense. So I don't want to say that Keynes goes away, but his influence is smaller. And Friedman's influence is much bigger. And Friedman's influence really are these two parallel branches that are happening at the same time. It's right here where I want to stop and give some names to these branches finally. So the Keynes branch is clear. It's the Keynesian branch, people who believe in Keynesians ideas. And that's a really powerful, big branch on this whole thing. But over here on the other side, there's the neoclassical and the monetarists. So neoclassical means the new classical. These are guys that you can draw a straight line all the way down to Adam Smith and saying, these are the ideas that we mostly follow. We add new things to them and adjust them as necessary, but this is the deep truth and the deep ideas that we mostly follow. And then kind of off that branch, parallel, is the monetarists, where these guys, their basic idea is, yeah, you classical guys, you're right, we follow you, but there's a key thing missing that we think is super important, and it's money itself. I mean, money. That is super powerful. I mean, what is money? It's just pictures of dead people, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's just colorful pictures of dead people on pieces of paper. That's all it is, but oh my God, it makes everything work. Without colorful pieces of dead paper or dead pictures of people on paper, say that 10 times fast. Dead pictures of people on paper. Dead pictures of people on paper. Dead pictures. Anyway, they have this whole thing of saying that's kind of a powerful, important thing. So when we look at solutions, we're going to focus on this money side. And the classical guys, when they're looking at solutions, they're going to focus on, well, just the price mechanism itself. And the Keynesian guys, when they focus on solutions, they're going to focus on how government can do it. So all three of these, it doesn't mean they're all exclusive. They're all totally separate from each other, but they have different focuses, if that makes sense. So later when we talk about things, you're going to have to understand these three branches to figure out, okay, we have a problem. Which branch is probably the best branch to pay attention to at any given moment? So the beginning of class, the very beginning of the year, we talked about command economies, mixed economies, free market economies. Again, I'm super oversimplifying. I don't talk about all the dead white guys. They're all white. They're all dead. But this is basically the branches that they mostly follow. Command economies, that was not really Karl Marx's idea, but that's what happened out of his ideas. Keynes is trying to talk about free markets, but understanding there's weaknesses, and so government's in there some way. Not so far that we're command economies, not that far, but not as far on the other side. These other guys, they're way over on the right side saying, nope, free markets are best. So I hope that kind of puts that together so far. And lastly, I want to get here to 2008, because in 2008, we had this big recession. And when the big recession happened, we had another one of those panic moments like the 1930s where like, oh my God, things are horrible. The sky is falling. Who should we listen to? How should we solve problems? And different countries took different approaches. America, they looked at what happened and mostly went back to Keynes. So what happens before 1930s, there is no Keynes. We're kind of going to the right side. 1930s, bad things happen. Let's move over to the Keynes, most people. And then by the 1970s, these ideas stop working. We kind of go back over here to this side. Then by 2008, most of the world is over here, and we have these problems. And well, this side kind of caused the problems. Let's go back over here and look at the Keynes side of things. And countries like China, like America, did that. But not everybody. Europe stayed on this side. Europe was terrified of things like inflation because of, well, Germany, because, well, of Hitler. And they looked at that and they were so terrified of that that they didn't even want to follow Keynes's ideas because that might lead you closer to like Hitler kind of problems. And so let's stay over here on this side, which kind of meant they suffered a little bit more in the short run. But it is a type of solution and it has better, maybe long run implications to it. So today we have these different branches and it's not like we always just follow one, but different countries pay attention to different ones. I would say today in general, we're mostly more believing that Keynes is the correct idea and correct way of doing things. So most countries do. That might not be true in the future, but that's kind of where we are today. So putting this together to this point, key things is understand the Keynesian side of things, understand who the monetarists are, and understand the neoclassical side of things. This is kind of, again, super overview. I don't have all the dead white guys, but here's some key ones. And so when we talk about solutions later, we're going to look at these different points of view sometimes when we do it. And yeah, Karl Marx is there, fine. One more I want to say though. One really popular branch today is one about behavior economics. Now I'm not putting behavior economics on this, mostly because the guy who really started the whole thing, Daniel Kahneman, is not dead yet. But behavior economics really is kind of on the classical side, but at the same time not. It's definitely not on the Keynesian side either. It's looking at things more on the psychology side of things. So it doesn't quite fit in here as easily. But also going forward with macroeconomics, we're not going to use a lot of behavior economic ideas because those are mostly micro ideas. So macro is really looking at things from the Keynesian side, the monetary side, and the classical side, trying to understand things on the scale of governments and the scale of countries. So behavior economics definitely deserves to be put on this branch as a big one, but it's not going to be that useful for us for this beginning of micro. So, beginning of macro. So, I hope that kind of gives you a perspective of where we're going to go going forward with things. I hope that makes sense, and I hope this video worked and didn't have a lot of problems, because I'm not going to edit it, I think, so hopefully it worked. And have a wonderful day or night or whatever. Stop. Just stop it. Stop it.